The day my husband died, his family handed me $10 and laughed. They said that was all I deserved. What they didn't know was that within weeks, a lawyer would reveal a secret that would change everything. Before we dive in, if you've ever been underestimated, counted out, or laughed at by someone who thought they knew your worth, this story is for you. Hit that like button right now because by the end of this video, you're going to want everyone you know to hear this. Let's get into it. The rain didn't care that my husband was being buried. It fell anyway. Cold, heavy, indifferent. The kind of rain that soaks through your coat and settles into your bones like it belongs there. I stood at the edge of Elliot's grave with mud slowly swallowing the heels of my only good shoes. And I thought, this is the loneliest I have ever been in my entire life. And I have been lonely before, trust me. Elliot was a quiet man. Not the kind of quiet that makes people uncomfortable, the kind that made you feel safe. He never raised his voice. He never made promises he couldn't keep. He used to bring me a cup of tea every single morning without being asked, set it on the nightstand, and leave without waking me. 6 years of marriage, over 2,000 cups of tea. I would give everything I owned to have one more of those ordinary mornings. The minister spoke. I barely heard the words. I was watching the other side of the grave. Elliot's family stood there like a wall, dressed in black that looked expensive, faces arranged into expressions of grief they hadn't quite earned. His brother Conrad stood at the center of them, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room without saying anything, and somehow makes you feel smaller for it. He never liked me. He never pretended to. From the moment Elliot brought me home, a quiet, ordinary girl with no family name, Conrad had looked at me with polite disgust, barely tolerant. Elliot used to squeeze my hand under the dinner table at family gatherings, a small, secret pressure that said, I see it, I'm sorry. You are worth 10 of every person in this room, but Elliot was gone now, and his hand was not in mine. I stood alone on my side of the grave with a borrowed umbrella that kept tilting in the wind, and I felt the weight of Conrad's eyes on me. Not sorrowful, not even cold, just calculating like a man already measuring a room he plans to redecorate. The minister said ashes to ashes. Conrad straightened his cufflinks, and I pressed my hand flat against my chest, right over my heart, because I was terrified that if I didn't hold it together, I would simply come apart in the rain in front of all these people who would not catch me. I did not cry, not because I wasn't broken, but because some griefs are too big and too private to perform for an audience. I saved my tears for later, alone, in the dark, where they belonged. The motel room smelled like old carpet and someone else's life. There was a crack in the ceiling above the bed that looked like a river on a map, leading nowhere. The heater clicked and groaned through the night like it was in pain. The window didn't close all the way. Heater clicked and groaned through the night like it was in pain. The window didn't close all the way, and cold air crept in through the gap no matter how many times I pushed the latch down. I had been staring at Elliot's letter for 3 days. It sat on the nightstand, right where he used to place my morning tea, folded inside a plain white envelope with my name written in his handwriting. That careful, unhurried handwriting I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and sticky notes left on the refrigerator door. Nora, just my name, nothing else on the outside. I kept telling myself I would open it when I was ready. But grief doesn't wait for ready. Grief sits in the corner of every room you enter, quiet and patient, and it follows you into sleep and waits for you there too. On the 3rd night at 2 a.m, with the wind pushing through that broken window latch, I finally picked it up. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly tore it. The letter began the way Elliot always spoke, gently, without rush. He told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He apologized for leaving without warning, as though dying were something a good man could have avoided with better planning. He made a small joke about the tea. I've left instructions with no one, so you'll have to manage mornings on your own now. I laughed and I cried at the same time, and then I reached the paragraph near the bottom, and the laughter stopped. I should have told you sooner. I kept waiting for the right moment, and I ran out of moments, which is the most human mistake there is. Your mother didn't abandon you, Nora. She was taken from you, and what she left behind, no one was ever supposed to find. I read it 4 times. Then I sat completely still on the edge of that motel bed, in that cold room in the middle of the night, and something shifted inside my chest. Not healing, not hope, something quieter than both, like a key turning slowly in a lock I didn't know existed. I had always known I was adopted. The family who raised me were kind but distant people who died when I was in my 20s, leaving behind no answers, only the bare fact of my adoption, and a name on a document I was told meant nothing. I had buried my curiosity the same way you bury things that hurt too much to carry. Elliot had gone and dug it back up, with love, with 2 years of quiet, secret searching, with a photograph tucked carefully behind his final words. I turned the photograph over with trembling fingers, and I was looking at my own face, 40 years older, dressed differently, carrying a lifetime I knew nothing about, but my eyes, my exact eyes, looking back at me from across time. At the bottom of the envelope, one more thing, a name written on a small piece of paper in Elliot's handwriting, Vivian Alcott, and below it, an address. I sat with that name in the dark for a long time. Outside, the wind pressed against the broken window latch, and for the first time since I had lost everything, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel, like maybe, the story wasn't over. Like maybe Elliot, even from wherever he had gone, was still placing something gentle on my nightstand, still taking care of me, still saying, without words, "You are worth more than any of them ever told you." Sutton Graves slid a single sheet of paper across his desk. I didn't touch it immediately, I just looked at it. The way you look at something that you know, instinctively, is about to divide your life into a clean before and after, like a diagnosis, like a goodbye, like a door swinging open into a room that has no exit. The number on that paper had too many zeros to feel real, $1.4 billion. I had $47 in my bank account 11 days ago. I had eaten gas station crackers for dinner twice that week because I was rationing the little I had left. I had washed my hair in a motel bathroom sink because the shower pressure was broken and I couldn't afford to move somewhere better. And now this man, this quiet, elderly lawyer with kind eyes and a careful voice, was telling me that I owned companies, properties, accounts in countries I had never visited, a controlling stake in corporations whose names I had seen on buildings and never once thought had anything to do with me. I pressed my hands flat on my knees so Sutton wouldn't see them shaking. "Take your time," he said softly. I almost laughed. Time. I had nothing but time. And apparently, I also had everything else. But here is what nobody tells you about the moment your life changes completely. Nobody tells you it doesn't feel like joy, not at first, not even close. It feels like standing at the edge of something enormous and dark, and not knowing if you are about to be saved or swallowed whole. Because the money wasn't just money, it was Vivian. It was a mother who had held me for, Sutton told me quietly, exactly 4 hours after I was born, before her father came into that hospital room and made her sign the papers. 4 hours. He told me she had named me before she gave me up, a name no one ever used, a name she carried privately for the rest of her life. I asked him what it was. He opened a folder, found a single line in an old handwritten document. "She named you Celeste," he said. "It means heavenly," I finished. I don't know how I knew that, I just did. I stared at the wall behind Sutton's desk for a long moment. There was a small framed print there, a painting of the ocean, calm water, pale horizon. Vivian had searched for me for decades. She had found me 3 years ago and spent those years watching from a distance, too frightened, too ill, too broken by old guilt to simply knock on my door and say, "I never stopped loving you. I never had a single day where I didn't." She died without saying it out loud, and I never got to say it back. That is the part no amount of money can fix. That is the part that still sits quietly in the corner of every room I enter, right alongside the grief for Elliot. 2 absences shaped like the 2 people who loved me most completely, both of them gone before I ever fully understood what I had. I picked up the document from Sutton's desk. I read my name, my full, legal, inherited name. Nora Alcott, and I signed it with a hand that had not stopped trembling since the night I opened a letter in a cold motel room and found my whole life hiding inside it. I was eating toast when the world found out who I was. Not a lavish breakfast, not a celebration meal, just plain toast with butter in the small hotel room Sutton's office had arranged, a modest business hotel 3 blocks from the Alcott legal offices. I had been there for 2 weeks, quietly moving through the verification process. Then the news anchor said a name, Vivian Alcott. I set the toast down. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Mystery Heiress Surfaces. My face appeared on the screen. I stared at myself on that screen for a long time. I thought about the motel, the crackers, the broken shower, the cold air through the window latch, Conrad's laugh in that lawyer's office, sharp and careless as a slap. And then my cracked phone, the same phone I had carried through all of it, began to ring. Numbers I didn't recognize, then numbers I did. I let them all go to voicemail, all except one. Sutton called to tell me calmly that the story was now in 7 countries, that the board of Alcott Global had released a dignified statement confirming the transfer, that everything was proceeding exactly as Vivian had planned. She anticipated this moment, Sutton said quietly. She prepared for every detail. She wanted your entrance into this to be protected. She thought of everything. I pressed the phone against my chest after he hung up. Vivian had planned this from her sickbed. Still trying, in the only language available to her at the end, to be a mother. Outside my hotel window, the city moved the way cities always do, indifferent, unstoppable, unbothered. The first thing I did was drive back to the motel. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and quiet. I parked outside and sat in the car for a moment just looking at the building, that tired, humble little structure with its flickering vacancy sign and its parking lot full of cracks where stubborn weeds pushed through. I had cried in room 7 of that building more times than I could count. It was the loneliest place I had ever lived. It was also the place where I found out who I really was. Mrs. Hadley was behind the front desk, exactly where she always was, reading a paperback novel with a cracked spine, her reading glasses perched at the very end of her nose. She was a small woman in her 70s with white hair and careful hands, and the particular quietness of someone who has seen enough of life to stop being surprised by it. She looked up when I walked in. She didn't react to my face the way people had been reacting for 2 weeks. No wide eyes, no nervous shifting, no sudden performance of warmth that had never existed before. She just looked at me the way she always had, like I was simply a person, worthy of basic human decency. Nothing more complicated than that. "You look better," she said. "You sleeping?" I smiled. "Getting there." I slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a check. 6 months of every room in the building paid in full. Enough to give her breathing room, enough to fix the heater that groaned through winter nights and replace the window latches that never closed properly, and maybe, finally, fix the shower in room 7. She stared at the envelope without opening it. "That's too much," she said quietly. "You put an extra blanket under my door," I said. "On the coldest night. You didn't knock. You didn't make it a moment. You just did it." She looked up at me then, and something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, something older and softer than surprise. "Anyone would have done that," she said. "No," I told her gently, "they wouldn't." I had learned that by now. I had learned the difference, slowly and painfully and completely, between people who perform kindness and people who simply practice it, quietly, without audience, without expectation of return. Elliot had been that kind of person. Vivian, in her own tragic, limited, desperate way, had been that kind of person too. And Mrs. Hadley, with her extra blanket and her paperback novel, and her complete lack of interest in who I was becoming, she was that kind of person. I drove away from the motel with the windows down despite the cold. And I thought about Vivian, who built an empire from grief and guilt and never once stopped looking for the daughter she lost. Who died before she could say the words she had been rehearsing for 40 years, who left behind everything she had ever built and placed it, quietly, completely, without condition, into the hands of a woman eating crackers alone in a motel room. I thought about Elliot, who spent 2 years searching in the dark on my behalf, who carried a secret that must have weighed enormously, who wrote it all down in a letter and tucked a photograph inside it, and trusted that I would be brave enough to follow where it pointed. 2 people who loved me without ever making me feel like a burden for being loved. I pulled over on a quiet street, and I finally let myself cry. Not the restrained, private grief of a woman performing composure in front of people who wished her small, but the full, gasping, honest kind, the kind that has been waiting patiently in the corner of every room, carrying everything you refuse to put down. I cried for Elliot and his morning tea. I cried for Vivian and her 4 hours. I cried for the girl I had been, unnamed, unclaimed, quietly invisible, who had walked through her entire life not knowing that 2 people were already loving her from a distance. When it passed, I sat in the stillness. The framed $10 bill was being hung in my office that same afternoon. The Vivian Alcott Foundation papers were already signed. And somewhere in a quiet filing cabinet in Sutton Graves's office, there was a document that said, in careful legal language, that I belonged to something, that I had always belonged to something, that I was never, not for a single day of my life, as alone as I had believed. I started the car, and I drove forward, into a life that had been waiting for me all along. I still have the $10 bill. It sits in a simple black frame on the wall of my office. The office that looks out over a city Vivian helped build, in a building that carries her name, filled with people who work every single day to honor something she spent her whole life constructing from grief and silence and stubborn, unbreakable love. People who visit the office for the first time always notice it. They stand in front of it a little longer than they expect to. A crumpled, faded $10 bill in a frame. No elaborate display, no dramatic lighting, no grand explanatory plaque. Just a small engraved plate beneath it that reads, "This is where I started. Never forget." Some people smile at it politely, assuming it is some kind of motivational decoration. A symbol chosen for effect, something a designer suggested and I approved without much thought. They don't know what I know. They don't know that Conrad pressed that bill into my palm in a lawyer's office with his family watching and laughed, actually laughed, like a man who had never once in his comfortable, inherited life considered the possibility that he could be wrong about a person, wrong about their value, wrong about their story, wrong about everything. They don't know that I carried that bill through the worst weeks of my life, through a motel room that smelled like old carpet, through dinners of crackers and tap water, through nights so quiet and so dark that I genuinely was not sure I would recognize myself by morning. They don't know that it sat in my coat pocket when I rode a 4-hour bus to a county I had never visited, holding a photograph of a woman with my eyes, trying not to hope too loudly inside my own chest. They don't know any of that. But I do, and I need you to understand something, and because this is the part that matters most. This is the reason I am telling this story at all. Conrad's cruelty did not break me, but it also did not save me. What saved me was a cup of tea left on a nightstand every morning for 6 years by a quiet man who saw my worth before I fully believed in it myself. What saved me was a letter written with shaking hands by someone who ran out of time, but refused to leave without pointing me toward the truth. What saved me was an elderly woman who slid an extra blanket under a motel room door on a cold night and never once asked to be thanked for it. What saved me was a mother I never met who named me Celeste in a hospital room, held me for 4 hours, and then spent the rest of her extraordinary life making sure that when the right moment came, I would be protected, provided for, found. She named me Celeste, heavenly. I did not feel heavenly for most of my life. I felt ordinary and overlooked and quietly, persistently small, the way people make you feel small when they repeat it often enough, and you are too tired and too alone to argue back. But here is what I know now, what I would walk back through every hard moment to tell the younger version of myself, sitting in that motel room with crackers and a cracked phone and a grief too large for her body. Your value was never stored in what they gave you. It was never dependent on who acknowledged it. It was never diminished by who laughed. The people who mock your $10 are not your judges. They are not the authors of your story. They are not even particularly important characters in it, no matter how large they loom in the moments when you are most afraid. They are simply people who looked at you and saw the surface, and mistook the surface for the whole. Elliot never made that mistake. Vivian, from her careful, heartbroken distance, never made that mistake. And slowly, through everything that happened, I stopped making that mistake about myself too. That is the inheritance that matters most. Not the buildings, not the accounts, not the name on the glass door of a corner office in a city that moves like it has somewhere important to be. The inheritance that matters, the one I will carry for the rest of my life, is the knowledge that I was loved before I was found, that someone was looking for me even when I had stopped looking for myself, that the story was never as finished as my worst nights made it feel. I think about you sometimes, the person watching this right now. I don't know what version of the motel room you are sitting in. I don't know what your $10 looks like, what small, sharp cruelty someone handed you when they thought you were finished. I don't know how long you have been carrying it or how heavy it has gotten, or how many nights you have stared at a cracked ceiling wondering if the weight will ever lift. But I know this, with everything I am and everything I have become, you are not finished. The letter has not arrived yet, the photograph is still waiting in the envelope, and the person who truly sees you, who has perhaps always seen you, is still, quietly and faithfully, placing something gentle on your nightstand. Hold on, follow where it points. The other side of your hardest moment is not empty. It never was. If any part of Nora's story felt like yours, if you have ever been handed $10 and a laugh by someone who thought that was all you deserved, I want you to do one thing right now. Share this video. Not for the numbers, not for the algorithm, but because somewhere tonight someone you love is sitting in their own cold room wondering if their story is already over. Tell them it isn't. And if you want to be here for every story we tell, subscribe. We are building something here for the people who were told they didn't belong anywhere. You belong here. We will see you in the next one.